Hello,
Okay.
and welcome to Insurrection with Brenton Lengel. I carried formerly on the Starcom radio network, now carried on my YouTube channel because radio is hard and you got to do it at the same time every day, and I like just doing it whenever. And I am here joined with Caleb Maupin. Caleb, how you doing?
I'm great. How about yourself?
I'm terrific. Things have been going really well with my channel lately. I actually have a debate coming up with T-Jump on Black Lives Matter, and I'm going to crush him. And I did a debate on faith with Armin Navabi of Atheist Republic on Monday that went over really well. Though I think it confused some of the people because I used a different definition of faith than they're used to. But I feel like if people talk about this exact same idea of the concept, and if you click on a debate and you get from the debaters exactly what you thought you'd get, you're just wasting your time.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, you always want it to be not what you're expecting. You want to it will kind of grab people. When I debated against Adam Kokesh, our debate was supposed to be about, is police brutality caused by capitalism? And we ended up debating intense ideological stuff, if you'll recall.
Yeah, I remembered that. He's agreed to speak with me, so I'm thinking I might debate him in the future, though I don't know if it'll be on Modern Day Debate or not.
Okay.
I need to lock down a time. Though it's weird because Modern Day Debate, when I first started with them, they're like, oh, you want to do political debates? I mean, that's kind of weird. Our audience, I guess, will roll with it. Now it's like all they want to do.
Wow.
So for those of you who are just joining us, and Caleb, I just sent you the link, by the way.
Awesome. Tweeting it out.
Beautiful. So this is the second in a series where I talk about one of my personal heroes, Buenaventura Durruti, who I think of as the anarchist Che Guevara. He's one of the great heroes of our movement, one of the great heroes of the Spanish Civil War. And the previous one, we sort of talked about his birth, his time as a very infamous figure, but also a union member. And this time we're going to get really into the meat of his story. And this is a lot of the stuff. For those of you who don't know, among being a playwright, a comic author, and a poet, I'm also a screenwriter, and I've written a screenplay about his life that Caleb has been wonderful enough to read. So we thought it might be fun to, go through and talk with each other about this really interesting and engaging historical figure within the anarchist movement. Just basically as two people who are fairly well acquainted with radical circles, and especially the radical left. And Caleb, do you want, in case anybody in my audience doesn't know you, do you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
Sure. I'm Caleb Maupin, journalist, political analyst. I consider myself to be an advocate of 21st century socialism. I've traveled around the world. I do broadcast journalism. I've done a lot of writing. And Brent and I have known each other since Occupy Wall Street. And he's going to tell me about Durruti, and I am going to react to what you tell me. So there you go. Other than play, I know absolutely nothing. So
yeah. So first off, I wanted to just, before we get into it, and if you guys are interested, you can also watch part 1 in the link so you can get caught up on his background. But he was in the Metal Workers Union. And I wanted to just show people some pictures of Durruti from this book. This is the book that's in the background and all of my stuff. This is by Abel Paz, who was a 15-year-old boy involved with the anarchists during the uprising. He was chased out of he had to flee to France. He was chased out of Spain after the fascists won and returned and took up guerrilla fighting against the Francoist regime. The fascist Francoist regime was imprisoned for a number of years, and when he came out, he had become a historian and has written volumes on the CNT-FI. And it's both the work of a historian, but also it is a wealth of firsthand radical history, because he was there for a lot of this, or at least was involved. He saw the Spanish Civil War, which a lot of people that write about the period, with the exception of Orwell, do not. Those of you who have been following my channel, we have also this is kind of the crossover, because I've been reading with Bobby of the 5x5 Mustache Mafia podcast. We've been going chapter by chapter through George Orwell's Homage to Catalonia, and that is Orwell's account of fighting with the Marxist unit, the POUM, during the Spanish Civil War. And so they never met, unfortunately, but this is kind of like our Avengers moment where we've got the radical crossover between Durruti and Orwell. Though Orwell is not yet in the country. And interestingly enough, Durruti's group was actually called Los Justicarios by the press, the more friendly parts of the press, which translates to the Avengers. So first off, I just wanted to get people an idea of like who this guy was, like as a person, as opposed to as an icon. First off, I wanted you all to see this. Here's a picture of Durruti. This is him right here, and he's like in his I think he's like 19 in this picture, and he's with the Metal Workers Union. The other just ones that I wanted people to see was this one here. This is a shot of Durruti during his first exile in France. And he's the guy trying to pour the wine, looking like a total doof. And then finally, there was one more. Here's his famous mugshot, by the way, that the picture on the cover is taken from. And this is Durruti, Ascaso, and Jover. These were the Avengers. He was also known to hang out with Oliver. Oliver and Jover in my script are kind of joined together, but they were two separate people. And you see Durruti right there in the middle. They have just come off a hunger strike. And yeah, I mean, you can actually see in the picture of Durruti here, you can see how his cheeks are in, because he has been hunger striking in the French prison. But of course, as we know, they were unable to hold him. Looking through these pictures, you know, when you think about like all of the like high adventure kind of like heroic and, you know, to some terrorist deeds he did, I'm always kind of struck with just like his humanity as a guy. Like I can tell just looking at this, Durruti's like the kind of guy who walks into a room and bumps into like the table and almost knocks something over by accident. He strikes me, you know, as not a clumsy guy, but a guy who's always a little awkward. I mean, do you get that sense from the pictures?
Well, yes, but I feel like men in general looked like that in the 1930s a little bit more. Like the outfits that people wore, like he's wearing a bow tie. Well, nowadays, if someone wears a bow tie, that's kind of like a nerdy kind of thing to do. But back then, people wore bow ties all the time. I mean, and the other thing is that, you know, he's quite skinny. He comes across as quite skinny. But then again, you have to remember back then the diet was a lot different and people just weren't as heavy. A lot of, you know, old pictures from the Spanish Civil War, but even, you know, pictures of like Italian Americans, you'll have like a very skinny person with like long black hair. I mean, that was almost like the stereotype of what an Italian or a Spaniard looked like during that time. You know, I mean, when I saw the mugshot and all that, I thought, you know, this could be like a 1930s gangster or something. You know, that's what popped into my head. But of course, it's not. I mean, you know, he was a Spanish anarchist and anti-fascist.
Yeah, Spanish anarchist, anti-fascist. Now, he was, you know, he did rob banks like gangsters in the 1930s. But, you know, at the same time, this was a very different world. Now, we went over this in the last stream, but just so people understand kind of the political context that Durruti is operating in, there have been massive miners' strikes that the military has been called in to break. And these were broken by like Francisco Franco. Durruti was at this miners' strike as a child and saw this, also, on top of that, like really, especially as the war broke out, it got even more brutal. But the Spanish upper class hated the Spanish lower class with a passion that is hard for us to really understand. What I can go with there is a quote from one of the fascist generals during the uprising where he said to the paper, "Do you know what's wrong with Spain?" indoor plumbing or modern plumbing. In the past, we could count on plague and disease to wipe these vermin out. But now that this isn't happening, we can't expect them not to breed, and we can't expect them not to be infected by the virus of Bolshevism. After all, rats carry the plague. That's how they talked about their own countrymen. And furthermore, what's also important, you can look this up. This is reported by liberal historian, and by liberal, I don't mean like on the left, if anybody thinks liberal means on the left. I mean like devoted to capitalism, non-partisan, Adam Hochschild in Spain in Our Hearts. And he writes about Reforma Agraria, where the sons of Spanish nobles would be blessed by priests and hunt peasants on horseback for sport, like they were fox hunting. And it was done to punish the peasants for daring to ask for land reform so that they could have a little patch of land for them to own. So that's the kind of cruelty in the society that we're dealing with. So first off, like Durruti has been all over the world. He's been banned from a number of countries, and he attempted to kill the King of Spain. He spent some time in a French prison, and before he could be extradited to Argentina for execution, he was forced to be freed, largely. Caleb, now you mentioned during this time that the French government may have had a large revolutionary and sympathetic socialist element to it. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, the Communist Party of France during that time period had millions of members. And I believe this was during the time period of the Popular Front, when the Communist Party and the Socialist Party had been elected and were running the government. Now, they lost power a couple of years later, but I think this was the period where France was friendly with the Soviet Union, and there was a lot of progressive reforms that were going on during that time. That was kind of the strength of French communism in that period. One thing that I thought was interesting that you mentioned, this class hatred. I'm immediately forced to think of South and Central America, former Spanish colonies, where you see even today that same level of contempt. If you hear the anti-Maduro Venezuelans talk, the way they speak about the supporters of Hugo Chavez or the supporters of Maduro is that same level of just contempt. And you think about, in Guatemala or Honduras or Nicaragua and a lot of these countries where a civil war broke out between Marxist revolutionaries and the right wing, these horrendous massacres that happen where people just get exterminated in huge numbers. A lot of times in South and Central America, it takes on a racial component where it's like kind of, the lighter you are, the better you are, is kind of the attitude. And that, Pinochet is still widely loved among, a lot of wealthy people in South and Central America. This is a guy who saved us from communism. It's, the racial element is there, but there's just a class hatred, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting because all of these are countries that were at one point colonized by Spain. Yeah. And what we find is, especially with Franco invading Spain with the Army of Africa, in a lot of ways, Spanish fascism was it was like the colonialism that had been exported and forced onto other countries rebounded on its own country. And, this also hasn't been the only time that the Spaniards have been, brutal to their own people. Of course, the example is for instance, the Spanish Inquisition. So that there is a precedent and a history of monstrous levels of brutality that we've seen, which is oddly, especially if you watch my streams with Bobby on Homage to Catalonia, Spain is this incredible country where it's oddly you've got both extremes there. It's definitely when people talk about it as a passionate country, you really do, because one of the things that would happen during the Spanish Civil War is the Russians, both the Nazis and the USSR would send uncommissioned officers in to help train during the Spanish Civil War. The Russians came in, in black coats without rank on them, which was awesome. They'd be just no, I'm just here. I'm totally not here from Russia. And one of the things that drove the Russian commanders crazy was the Spaniards would be shooting at each other. And suddenly, like, it'd get around noon, and like everybody, fascist and Republican, would just pack up and go to have a siesta. They'd just be like, "No, we're not fighting now. We're having a siesta." Which I can think, imagining you're like a Russian officer, you've lived through the revolution, you've lived through World War I, and then these guys just leave to have a siesta.
Yeah, well, one thing I might add is, when you say their own people, Spain, many people have pointed out Spain is not a nation state, right? There's Catalonia, there's the Basque country, and that Spain is really, there's a number of nationalities in Spain, and that you may think, oh, it's like the United States, we got Ohio and Pennsylvania. No. These people have centuries of grievances against each other. They were united under one kingdom. It was almost like an empire, right? It was the Kingdom of Spain. But in terms of nationality, there are a lot of differences. And I believe, a number of the communist parties in Spain, don't say that they represent the people of Spain. They say they represent the peoples of Spain. A lot of them, and that the question of Catalonian independence, a couple of years ago, that was a very big movement of separation. Some people argued it was coming from the right. Other people saw it as coming from the left. I mean, there's a whole history of Basque separatist, civil war that went on. It's really interesting to think about. Did nationality play a role? I mean, were different nationalities supporting Franco or supporting the left? And was there a national divide in the Civil War?
I mean, I haven't read a lot about it in specifically in the work of Abel Paz, and I don't recall much of it in Adam Hochschild, but that may be because Adam is writing from a Western liberal perspective. Like he knows me, I just naturally grouped them all together. What I do know is that there was definitely a racialized element with the use of Moorish troops. And it was part of the campaign of terror. One of the things that the general, I believe it was General Godade, said as they were planning the coup in the country was that they needed to project a aura of mastery. And they would be sure to, once they took over an area, anyone who still supported the Republic would absolutely be shot as an example to everyone else. There were also a number of terroristic things, and sadly, they used the prospect of rape at the hands of Moorish troops as a threat against the women who were leftists, or at least not even leftists, just if they supported the Republican government as opposed to this new dictatorship that tried to take to try to take power. Again, it's like it's a level of brutality that I think a lot of people in the first world are not necessarily used to, even though, you'll see like if you've got groups like Patriot Prayer, they will wear shirts that, say like free commie rides with a helicopter and referencing Pinochet, who ironically never actually dropped a single communist out of a helicopter. He did break down, but the people that he killed in the helicopters were officers within his own military. So they're really celebrating the murder of soldiers, but they think they're celebrating the murder of commies. And similarly, like you'll see like on Patriot Prayer, you'll see like some people will put it on their stuff. It'll be like RWDS for right-wing death squads. And they're celebrating the exact murderers that you talked about that happened around in Central America, South America, and like Jakarta.
Right.
So
some have argued that the cultural, the gender roles in, Latino, Spanish, countries, the way that there's that traditional kind of patriarchy manifested
machismo,
culturally, that may play a role in some of the violence, and not just on the right, but on the left. Many people have pointed out that in Italy and Spain and in Latin America, there is kind of a tendency for left adventurer figures like, Che Guevara, like the Red Brigades in Italy. And some have argued that could be rooted in the gender roles and the way it's a little bit different than the Anglo traditional gender roles. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I can't really say that. I've read stuff about that where they made that argument before. Do you think there's a factor there?
There may be a factor. I know one of the big things that the fascists loved to call their enemies was marcones, which translates roughly to like pussy.
In Anglo countries too. I mean,
yeah, that's kind of a normal thing. I do know. So Spain in this period was a little like Saudi Arabia, in that women were not allowed to go around unescorted. That was a really big thing. But also, the anarchists in particular were working very hard to overthrow this. One of the things that a conversation between Derudi and Emilienne, and this actually his I guess his paramour, because they never got married. But Emilienne, at a time when he was back in, he'd been let out of prison in France. He'd snuck back into Spain and was living in Barcelona, but was unable to work because he was a wanted man in the country. And one of the really crazy things is people would come over to Derudi's house to like plan for the defense of Barcelona and to talk about, what's going on. And they'd find him like in a pink apron, like washing dishes and taking care of their daughter, Colette. And in fact, like Derudi, apparently at the beginning of this, he was a little uncomfortable with it. But Emilienne said to him, what, it's not enough that our society is already divided into classes. Are you going to make more classes in our home? And, Derudi honestly accepted that and jumped right into it. I think one of the famous things was that like, because Spain did not allow divorce at the time. Yeah. But what would happen is that if people wanted to get married under the CNT-FI, what they would do is they say, okay, you can come up here. You both sign this paper and we'll give you each a copy of the paper. And you're married as long as you have it. And we'll marry you right here. And if you want to divorce, bring us the paper and we'll tear it up and you'll just be divorced and that's it. And then after the woman had left, the CNT would take the man aside and go, hey, okay, look, so here's the deal. We told you that, but we don't want to be doing this like every week. So first time you come by, we'll just tear it up. No big deal. You keep coming by and doing this, we're going to kick you in the balls every time. And so that was like their way of handling people who were just getting married and divorced and married and divorced and married and divorced.
Well, right. I guess, and probably culturally, right, you had to marry someone in order to have sex with them. So yeah. It could be, to have a one night stand, you went and had a marriage ceremony, right? Is that probably make sure people didn't do that?
I'm guessing people definitely did that. And also, this is what's really important because like, when you talk about like the beginnings of the free love movement and stuff, and you'll notice fascists freak out about like attacks on the family. And I think a lot of this just goes back to when marriage and family were like a really, really abusive institution where if you got into a bad marriage, there was absolutely nothing you could do about it. And oftentimes marriages were arranged and women didn't really have a choice in who they married, especially if they were upper class women. So like the free love that you saw like kind of exploding in this era is people really kind of shaking off these medieval, very brutal conventions. And so like I think when we see the people, when they think of the free love movement, they think of like the hippies in the 1960s, but really like the grounds of it here, like within anarcho-feminism and within the anarchist movement. And I'm sure there's something similar, with the Marxists, people are trying to find a better way to live, both socially and economically.
Yeah, well, the brilliance of Marxism is that it just blows to shreds this notion that there is a sacred family unit that was, ordained by God, and this is how households should be. And, you read The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State by Frederick Engels. He talks about how in hunter-gatherer civilization, they didn't even keep track of whose kid was whose kid, right? Yeah. The whole tribe was basically a family. Then with The Origin of Private Property, suddenly, family is, a man and all of his slaves and all of his property and his wives. Now we have monogamy, and we're moving toward having gay marriage, right? And that the right wing, I used to see bumper stickers when I was a kid, very common in my area. I would see a bumper sticker that had like a math problem. It'd be like marriage equals one man plus one woman, and then it would have a Bible verse. And I would see that all the time. And I remember asking people, how many wives did Moses have? Abraham have? Maybe you should read the Bible again, because if marriage is just one man and one woman, it would seem like, many, many prominent biblical figures were in full violation of that, right? And that marriage, just like anything else, changes as the economic base changes, right?
Yeah, and people do what makes sense.
Yeah. And that, yeah, I mean, and that's the brilliance of Marxism, is it kind of blows to shreds that every society in history wants to pretend that it's eternal. Like, you read science fiction now, they still have capitalism in space. You people trying to interpret like ancient Greece and Rome, and they think it's the same as now. We project our illusion onto eternity, where the reality is the family may be very different thousands of years from now. It may be a completely different structure, right? And it was completely different 1,000 years ago. So
yeah, no, I think you're totally right. So anyway, let's get into what's going on specifically. A man by the name of Manuel Anzana became president of the Republic on May 10th. This was important because like the fascists were really mad about the liberal Republicans winning this election. But the government refused to see the threat. And in fact, according to President Azana, there's no reason to be alarmed. The government has the situation under control. The absurdity of this attitude was clear after July 10th, when everyone saw that the government had completely lost control. The soldiers enlisted in plots took orders only from General Mola, the leader of the rebellion, who had installed his general staff at Pamplona. This is important also because General Mola was supposed to be the dictator of Spain, but his plane went down and he died mysteriously. Perhaps Franco knocked him out, or perhaps it was just a freak accident. But during this time, pretty much like everyone was preparing for a battle that they believed was inevitable. Phalangist groups were escalating their terrorism in attempts to create a panic among the people. Assaults on individual leftist activists multiplied. They injured several socialist legal experts, including Jimenez de Azuna, who was the vice president of parliament at that time. So the vice president, like that'd be like, well, the fascists would love Mike Pence, but like that would be like if Joe Biden got attacked by fascists and Barack Obama was like, yeah, everything's fine.
Well, I mean, the thing was, the Spanish Republic that had been elected was very, very, very progressive, right? That's why it was being targeted. I mean, it was redistributing land, from what I understand. It had literacy campaigns. It was doing all kinds of really, really socially progressive things. And the Communist Party had elected seats. The Socialist Party had elected seats. Trade unions played an important role. And this campaign of violence was the ruling class feeling that its power was threatened by the elected government and abolishing democracy in the hopes of preserving their wealth and power. That's my understanding of it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it was. Like, I don't know if the liberal government was as progressive as like we'd like to think, but it was definitely more progressive than anything that they'd had before, because again, they were coming out of a kind of feudalism beforehand, and it heavily controlled by the church. Now, just so you know, like statistics between this period leading up to the revolution, there was definitely a class war breaking out. There were 160 churches had been burned down. 269 people had been killed. 1,287 had been injured. There were 113 general strikes, 228 partial strikes, and 145 bombings. The UGT, that's the Union General, the General Union of Workers, which was the less radical of the two unions, had 1,447,000 members. And the CNT, that's what would later join with the CNT-FI to become, the famous like black and red anarchist flag. They had just a little bit more. They had 1,500,077 members. So more than 1/3 of the country's 8 million workers were unionized at this point. So the unions wield immense power just right there. The fascists, on the other hand, had 549,000 enrolled in various organizations. They had between 20,000 and 30,000 retired soldiers, 50,000 phalangists, 50,000 priests, and millions of pesetas. So these are kind of the stakes that they've got on here. Plus, Franco's army is primarily, and this is important, like the 20 to 30,000 retired soldiers, these are the people that came out of the military and were like, I can't stop being in the military. I can't stop. It seems like the life that they lived probably out defending the colonies is something that they just couldn't give up. because most of the Spanish military were conscripts, and they weren't necessarily fascists. And oftentimes there was huge issues that the fascists had with people defecting because they really didn't care to fight for Franco during the revolution. They'd literally just been forced to do it. So that's kind of the stake here. So you've got a military that can kind of go either way. Most of the enlisted men are not really enlisted. They're not volunteers. They're conscripts. But then you also have this kind of core of hardened people who I guess really, really liked bullying folks in Morocco and stuff. Plus you've got the Foreign Legion with the Moors. So that's kind of the table is set here. And one of the big events that does get gone over in my script was that in Madrid, 4 gunmen shot down the assault guard Jose Castillo, who was well known for his leftist views. Now, as you remembered, the Guardia Civil was sort of the police in the country, and the assault guards were the police in the city. The assault guards were primarily socialist, or at least socialist leaning, and the Guardia Civil or the civil guards, they tend to be very right leaning. And so these two organizations would wind up fighting each other as part of the revolution. So essentially you've got two police forces that are, even now before anything's happened, they're already at each other's throat.
Wow.
Yeah. So in retaliation for this murder, a group of assault guardsmen pulled Calvo Sotelo out of his home. Calvo Sotelo was he was a major fascist politician, I believe, and to take him to the general office for questioning. His corpse was found early the next morning in Madrid's Eastern Cemetery. So, you know, there's killing, there's reprisal killings, and these killings are coming from the police on both sides of the equation. Now, what we have, and I'm going to skip forward because really, like, this is fascinating, just like all the different regiments and everything that was going on between everyone. What I want to really stress here, by the way, because we mentioned the burning of churches and we mentioned 50,000 clergy on the side of the fascists, but that was not the only clergy in Spain. There was clergy that had sided with the anarchists, clergy that had sided with the Republic, and Franco murdered clergy just as much as the Republicans did. But somehow the only thing people seem to remember is the Red Terror, even though the White Terror was way worse, and both sides killed priests and nuns were combatants on both sides. There's a famous saying in Spain that the Spaniards follow their priests either with a candle or a club.
Well, Winston Churchill, in his history of the Second World War, even though this is before the Second World War, spends pages and pages describing alleged atrocities by the Spanish Republic and trying to justify the crimes of Franco. You know, this is the standard, you know, I mean, all over the world, the memo was sent out to good Catholics that they should not support the Spanish Republic because it was killing priests and nuns, and that Franco was a good Catholic who was trying to stop these crazy, violent anarchists and communists. And from what I understand, the communists actually did try to restrain some of the anarchists because of that, right? There was a fear that the anarchists, through some of their actions against the church, were empowering and giving, helping create propaganda that could be used against the Spanish Republic, and that is one of the arguments, is that you know, in Homage to Catalonia, Orwell is accusing, you know, the communists of holding back the revolution. You know, the communists, if you read, like, they call her La Pasionaria, Dolores,
Yeah,
leader of the Communist Party. The way she remembers it is that these crazy, violent anarchists were going around burning churches and doing all these atrocities against the church while they were trying to build an alliance with progressive clergymen, and they were ruining it. And, you know, there are different interpretations of how this went down. But I
mean, my guess is that it's probably,
right?
My guess is it's probably somewhere in the middle, because you've got Abel Paz, and he's specifically saying the only priests that are getting attacked are priests that, like, are essentially preaching sedition against the government, and by the government I mean the Republic, which means they're fascists, like, from the pulpit. And there's a big passage in here about how priests, like, that remained loyal to the Republic and weren't a problem, were actually allowed perfectly fine. I think there was the Durruti column, which he would eventually found when they took a town from the fascists. They famously had like somebody, like a reporter came in and asked if they'd killed the local priest. And the old woman in the town said, well, kill him. Why kill him? He's harmless. And, now he might just settle down with a nice woman.
Right. Well, the other thing is that the church was also the state, right, under feudalism.
Mm-hmm.
And that it wasn't like, nowadays, you join this church, you join that church, the pastor's a nice, peaceful guy. Why would anyone want to harm him? Well, back then the church, had political power, right? I mean, and I think that to a lot of the peasants, it had a different meaning. It wasn't simply, this optional thing you do on Sunday morning to find spiritual enlightenment. This was the institution that maintained feudalism, right?
Yep. And well, not just that. I mean, like the church was influential in such things as, and we'll recognize this, spreading the Spanish flu. Ironically, the Spanish flu probably didn't start in Spain. It may have actually started in Kansas. But because it happened during World War I, all of the countries kept it under wraps and would not let anyone know that this terrible disease was ripping through their population. And Spain was the only one that wasn't involved. And so their papers carried it. And that's why it became the Spanish flu. And people assume that it started in Spain. But the church was really bad about it. In fact, like doctors at the time were recommending, stuff similar to what people recommend with COVID today, where they're saying stay away from large mass gatherings, kind of keep a distance between people. And the church is like, no, this plague is judgment from God. We're going to attend mass. We're going to have our religious rights. And there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. And, they killed hundreds of thousands of people as a result of that. And yeah, it's a story that happens time and time and time again. And I don't want to seem like I'm going on an anti-clerical bent. I literally spend an entire debate defending faith, but there's faith, and then there's just people being so set in their ways that they can't see the world around them.
Well, I mean, also I will say, I grew up as a Protestant, and that, countries where Catholicism has been the state religion for hundreds of years, it has a big impact on the culture and the way people relate to religion in general. In the United States, we're all about entrepreneurialism and work hard. And a lot of that is the quote unquote Protestant work ethic, you know what I'm saying? There's plenty of Catholicism here in the United States, but, we were founded generally by Protestants. It was a Protestant majority, and Puritans and Pilgrims and all of that. And a lot of the settlements, and that our kind of entrepreneurial work hard capitalism, get rich or die trying, that whole thing is very, very Protestant. I believe Donald Trump, he attended the church in New York City where the minister was actually Norman Vincent Peale. You ever heard of Norman Vincent Peale?
No, but that name doesn't sound good to me.
A 1950s self-help guru who was all about the power of positive thinking.
A grifter.
Yeah, basically, yeah. But he was a pastor who, would have people repeat under their breath, with Christ all things are possible, with Christ all things are possible, and self-hypnosis. And it was this 1950s kind of self-help guru who was big in New York City. That was Donald Trump's pastor. And that American Protestant Christianity tends to kind of embrace this entrepreneurial work hard, whereas, Catholicism as the state religion kind of had more of this kind of we're all a community, the church is the pillar of our community. We're going to kind of guide everyone. And it impacts the culture greatly. I mean, Catholic countries
definitely does,
and Protestant countries, they have a different worldview, even in an age where, we're very, very secular. I think that's interesting.
I think it's incredibly interesting. And, this because I was raised Catholic, and it's also very interesting to me that one of the major movements for peace, one of the major leftist movements, liberation theology, came out of the Catholic Church. Now, also, my grandmother on my mother's side was a Quaker. So I kind of got it from both ends, which is nice. And then eventually became a Buddhist. But so anyway, at this point, we're pretty sure that a revolt is going to take place. And on July 19th, they sort of have the calm before the storm as Durruti, Ascaso, and Oliver are organizing the workers to get ready for this attack. So Oliver visits the District of Defense committees. The unions designate meeting places for workers at the Woodworkers Union, the Construction Workers Union. And you can see just all of these unions are working together and they're getting ready to fight, which is both terrifying and also really. I'm struck that the transportation union and the metal workers union, one after another, everybody's getting on the same page here, and there's a great deal of class solidarity. Now, Durruti, they've been working on this, and everybody's getting ready. And eventually, Ascaso and Oliver are just so exhausted that they collapse. And Durruti was the only one who continued to stand. Fatigue seemed to increase his energy. He teased his weary friends, "These guys won't be fighting any battles today." So eventually, they distributed bottles of wine and smoked cigarettes and basically waited in the calm before the storm until eventually Garcia Oliver broke the silence. Is the machine gun mounted? And they had actually mounted a Gatling gun, like on the back of a vehicle that had been tricked out essentially as a modified armored vehicle. And they were driving this around with a big CNT-5 flag on it. So, they had a mobile Gatling gun, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, well, that was like the first machine gun, right? In the U.S. Civil War, at the end, they finally had those, right?
Yeah. The first machine gun was the Gatling gun, and that was in the U.S. Civil War. And then it was also used. This is interesting. It's almost like an updated thing, because in the Ukraine with the anarchist Black Army, the thing that Nestor Makhno was very famous for was his use of the Tachanka, which was a machine gun mounted on a horse-driven chariot. And that was one of the things that made the Black Army as effective as it was. There's one thing that I've found that anarchists are very good at. Is that we have strong hearts and very little else, so we have to learn to improvise.
But Joe Hill's line about the Gatling gun, right?
What was his line about that? I'm familiar with Joe Hill. I didn't know his line about the
one of his songs called "Should I Ever Be a Soldier." He has a verse: "Why do they mount up Gatling guns 1,000 miles from oceans where foreign fleets could never land? Ain't that a funny notion? If you must know the reason why, just strike for better wages. And then, my son, if you don't die, you'll sing this song for ages."
Yeah. It's a great song, and it's very true. And stuff like the Battle of Blair Mountain, they used machine guns on the workers there, and actually and that was in the United States, dropped incendiaries from the air. The bourgeoisie has never been happy when workers assert themselves.
Well, the Spanish Civil War is a great example of that, right? A democratic government is toppled in order to preserve capital, right? Mm-hmm. It's similar to what happened with the slaveholders against Abraham Lincoln, right? I mean, they couldn't tolerate democracy, so they overthrew, they took up arms violently, right? And in many countries in the world, we've seen this, that when the power of capital is threatened by an expansion of democracy, democracy is abolished by the bourgeoisie.
I'm hoping that doesn't happen this coming November. So, anyway, so while the vehicles, and this is, they're driving through the streets of Barcelona, they've got their armored truck. There's cries of CNT-5 from the city. And they stopped shouting. Suddenly, they stopped shouting for a moment, and everyone stared at one another. There was a sudden quietness. An assault guard looked at the crowd and then looked at himself. He had a rifle in his hand and a pistol on his belt. He didn't need both weapons, and there were so many unarmed men. He took his pistol from his belt and gave it to the person standing next to him. "Take it," he said. "We'll fight together." And this is just beforehand, before the attack commences. Now, we have here in the chapter, by the way, where you're first reading about this, is called Barcelona in Flames. So the fascists were incredibly overconfident coming into this. They put their military machine into gear just before 5 a.m. in the morning, and the leaders knew what they wanted, but the soldiers had been deceived into thinking they were defending a republic in peril. So the officers knew they're taking control of the thing, but what they've told the men underneath them is essentially that there's riots and looting in the city, and you need to go in there and take care of this situation. So a lot of the people who fought in Barcelona with the fascists didn't even realize what they were fighting and dying for. One of the fascist generals was noted to say, "The rabble will run like pussies as soon as they hear our cannons thunder." Now, the rabble were the assault guards who were already breaking rank and fraternizing with the CNT Phi. And together they formed an urban guerrilla force that would determine the outcome of the battle. They were joined by the Poom, who were as unarmed as the CNT. That was the biggest problem, was a lack of arms. The UGT militias and a number of activists from several other smaller organizations. Now, there were essentially like three columns coming in and assaulting. There was a big column with like horse-drawn people marching up, and the plan was essentially that each of these columns would unite in the center of the city and then spread out from there and take care of the rabble. Now, there were cannon fire. This battle was... So first off, you had the din of rifle and cannon fire. The cannon fire left strips of human flesh hanging from a tree. As the fascists marched up the street, and this was a very, very thin street. This was one of the fascist columns. Women in the apartments above threw whatever they had at the troops from the balconies. So they're tossing pots and pans. They're tossing plants, anything they can to stop this invading force. The captain of this particular column had his first surprise when the rabble didn't run from his cannon's fury, but he remade his defenses and continued to resist defiantly. So further on down, and this is one of the coolest things that did make its way into my script. The workers turned back the soldiers who shielded themselves with the men that they had taken prisoner earlier in the day. This enabled the positions of several machine guns whose gunfire nearly swept through the width of the factory. This was organized like towards the docks. So they had like a number of warehouses. Whose gunfire nearly swept the width. The workers continued fighting despite the carnage caused by their machine guns. They stabilized the front here. The group of rebels was thus unable to advance. The mountain artillery forces that took off from the docks soon encountered a huge surprise. Using electric forklifts from the port, the workers made a gigantic barrier out of the numerous balls of pressed paper. And then, with the support of the assault guards, they formed a line of resistance behind them that confronted the relentless cannon fire ordered by Captain Lopez Varela. So the troops in the route, they come in here thinking they're just going to wash over these people. And the workers have literally got a line of forklifts loaded with huge reams of industrial paper that made a shield that actually blocked bullets and some of the cannon fire. And they're able to actually advance and basically annihilate this line. By 11 in the morning, the workers had the upper hand in every one of the hot spots in the city. When the soldiers began retreating, the workers pushed the balls of paper that they had been using as barricades towards them, while others hidden behind them opened fire in their retreat. So the retreat just becomes a complete rout, especially at the docks. This is also one of the most incredible things was the taxi cab union. Because one of the three columns coming up like the center of the city was confronted by a union of taxi workers. And what they had done was they had strapped their taxis, set them to explode, set bricks on like the pedals and strapped the things with belts, and just sent these taxis crashing into the fascist lines and then, of course, exploding.
Car bombing.
Yeah. Car bombing, essentially, yeah. Though unlike the fascist ones that have happened, there weren't people driving the cars.
Well, yeah, I mean, but the cars, not only did they ram into people, they exploded, right? I mean, it was, there's a lot written about the use of car bombs. I believe the first car bombing was on Wall Street. Somebody was...
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it was a horse and carriage. It was before the car was invented. So somebody drove up somewhere in the Wall Street area with a horse and buggy. I believe it was an anarchist in like the 1800s or something like that. But they talk about, car bombing being, a tactic that's been used by resistance forces in many countries, the Battle of Algiers and the people of Algeria fighting the French. And in Vietnam, I know the Vietnamese resistance used car bombing, and that, cars are big devices full of, gasoline that's very flammable. And, it's something that people do, right?
Yeah. It's fascinating also that that these are taxi drivers, and those cars are their livelihood, and they are sacrificing them for the greater good to stop this military coup. Now, luckily, once the anarchists took control of the city, money wasn't as much of an issue, and so the taxi drivers, it's not like they were having problems as a result of getting rid of it. But that still takes an amazing amount of trust, I think.
Yeah, well, there's a popular IRA kind of rebel song called Johnson's Motor Car, where they talk about the IRA taking somebody's car from them and commandeering it for military operations, and it's quite popular. I think they give him a receipt, and the idea is after Irish freedom, you can take this back and we'll give you a new car. Yeah. So yeah.
So at this point, the situation is completely turned around on the fascists, it's still there's still elements of fascism that are, there's still holdouts within the city. Durruti famously, they're shooting from the Hotel Falcon. Said the two militants who approached him. One of them, his shirt, which had been white, now clung to his body, yellowed by gunpowder. And they'll roast us with bullets if we don't respond soon, Durruti replied. So they stormed the hotel, cleaned out the fascist marksmen, and then the area nearby became clear again. They decided to move all available machine gun to the balcony of the building holding the Casa Juan restaurant in order to attack I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of this. It's fascists. And this was done with the Transportation Workers Union. What should we do about the Brecca, which I believe is a location within Barcelona? We're going to clean it out, Ascaso said. They gathered their best armed militants among those present and formed two groups, one led by Garcia Oliver, who would take off along San Paulo Street, and the other would go up Nueva de la Rambla Street with Ascaso at its head. Durruti would remain in the plaza coordinating forces and leading them wherever they were needed most. When they reached the Brecca de San Pablo, the rebels, meaning the fascists, had installed 3 machine guns, one opposite Teatro Victoria, another next to the Moulin Rouge Cabaret, and the final one in the Brecca de San Pablo itself, which they were firing relentlessly. They tried to take cover in the doorways, Ascaso and the other anarchists, behind any object they could, while continuing to fire their pistols. The fascists would have massacred them if Garcia Oliver's group had not slipped around from behind the enemy. The rebels, now caught between two groups and completely disoriented, the militants who had been holding them down until they responded promptly, and everyone launched a mass attack. A burst of gunfire from Ascaso's automatic pistol brought down the captain who had been leading the fascist troops. So I'm going to skip through this because this is fascinating. But essentially, very soon, Commander Lazaro, who was the leader of the general staff, towards General Godade, who was the commander of this assault entirely, famously whispered to him when they realized they were completely screwed, "My general, I think we've gotten ourselves stuck in a mousetrap."
Well, it's interesting. It sounds very exciting to us now, but I mean, I can imagine living in a city where this kind of thing was going on around you was an utter absolute nightmare. I can't imagine what the people who lived through this, I mean, having this in their neighborhoods, in their streets, in their community. I mean, I can't imagine the pain and trauma that the ones who not only, who survived and didn't get killed or injured in the fighting would have just seen a lot of dead bodies and seen a lot of people being hurt. And I mean, it's really a nightmare. I mean, it's not something that anyone would want to live through.
I will agree with you 100% on that. And it's easy to kind of get swept up in the glory of something like this happening. But it is important to remember these are real people with real lives who are dying. And a lot of the fascists who are dying here, have been lied to about what they're going to be doing and are not committed fascists. Now, a lot, General Godade was, and he was rightly executed for it. I mean, I don't support the death penalty, but I figure if you're going to execute someone, the fascist general that tries to take over the country is probably good to be high on that list. So anyway, Goded's eventually, like as this continued, Goded had such disdain for the workers and for the people of the city that he refused to surrender over and over again. But eventually, it became that there was absolutely no alternative to this. Commander Lazaro continued telling Goded over and over again, just like said, a mousetrap. We're in a mousetrap. So finally, as this situation became worse and worse for the fascist, Goded started actually repeating to himself over and over again because he kept trying to appeal for reinforcements, which never came. And eventually was abandoned, which was what he said. And a guard officer underneath him corrected him, defeated Goded. It's not the same thing. Though it's interesting if this was backbiting, because fascists are known to be incredibly Machiavellian with each other. And I could very well see a fascist like not backing up another fascist if it meant support for them, even if it hurt their cause overall. That seems to be a tactic of a lot of fascist militaries and fascist regimes. Would you agree with me on that?
I don't know. I mean, the latest that I've seen is, Franco, very clearly backed by Hitler, backed by Mussolini, overthrowing an elected government. But I've seen fascists try to disavow him and say he wasn't a real fascist because he didn't dot the I and cross the T, and there was some other like subdivision of fascists that he killed, and so he was just a conservative dictator, not a real fascist. And similar nonsense goes on the left. And it's like some of these far right elements will try to say things like, like the Ku Klux Klan wasn't fascist because they didn't believe in like doctrinaire Mussolini fascism. And, it's just, this is just, nonsense. Fascism is a practice. It's not an ideology. It's a campaign of violence and terror against progressive movements. That's what it is. So it's not like a gospel or an ideology or a statement of principles. Fascists believe all kinds of crazy different things in different historical circumstances.
Yeah, and they're also, they're also as a rule deceptive. And they tend to lie about their own positions, and also their own positions are, tend to be incoherent. So it's very hard to deal with. I almost sometimes think of fascism less as an actual political movement and more as almost an aesthetic, if that makes sense.
No, I wouldn't say it's an aesthetic. I think it's more of just it's a symptom of capitalism in decay, right? As capitalism destabilizes and becomes, it's Bonapartism, but it's a particular form of Bonapartism that is right wing and trying to reinforce social hierarchy and try to beat back a progressive movement with mass killing and destruction. It is a reactionary form of Bonapartism. The best book on fascism I've ever read is called Fascism and Social Revolution by R. Palm Dutt, who was a leader of the Communist Party of Britain. He was actually born in India, and he was the leader of the Communist Party of Britain. And he wrote this great book, basically analyzing Mussolini, Hitler, and saying these people, they don't really, this is just gobbledygook, right? This is just, this is capitalism in crisis. This is an attempt to beat back the rise of the workers amid capitalism in crisis. And that social democracy and fascism are like a 1-2 punch in some ways, right? Social democracy comes first. Okay, we're going to give you a little bit. Now calm down. Social democracy doesn't work. The next punch is fascism, right? That,
right.
And that's generally, as capitalist societies decay, they have a brief kind of social democratic, okay, we're going to be friendly and listen to everybody. And that goes on for a while. And then pretty soon the contradictions within the ruling class get to be so extreme that you have and that's the big thing about fascism that is important to point out, is it's an internal ruling class fight. It's not simply, the ruling class setting up a dictatorship. It's one faction of the ruling class setting up a dictatorship and slaughtering other members of the ruling class.
Which makes sense because, like, in the businessman's plot that sought to unseat FDR and put into place a fascist government in the United States, FDR was like, that guy was born with a golden spoon in his mouth, a friggin' platinum spoon in his mouth. He was basically raised from birth to be someone like the president. And he was firmly on the side of the bourgeoisie. But even then, they still tried to overthrow him.
Yeah, and that forced him to then enter an alliance with the workers and do all kinds of great progressive stuff.
Hmm.
And that's the thing. When there is a division in the ruling class, it does create an opening for the workers to begin to assert their agendas. And especially in the 1930s, we had a massive communist party. We had the Soviet Union. We had a big trade union movement. And so that created more of an opening. Nowadays, I see the fights in the ruling class, and I see the left and organized political leftism as being so weak that I don't, I don't see that kind of situation. But it could happen, right? In theory, right? I mean,
Yeah, no, it could happen.
yeah.
The Carmelitas convent surrendered first. This was one of the last fascist holdout in the city. Rebel marksmen inside the building had killed many during the siege, and the people wanted to vent their anger on them. The outrage of the people on the street, and in reply, this one loyal civil guardsman. So he had remained. He was a Guardia Civil, but he had remained loyal to the Republic. So we can see the lines aren't completely there. He had participated in the action, and the colonel here intended to personally take charge of the prisoners. This outraged the people on the street, and in reply, the loyal civil guardsman sacrificially offered his chest to the mob. This was a needless gesture because the people were already imposed a certain moderation on themselves. They were not going to lynch the prisoners. They simply wanted to demonstrate their power over the prisoners, and needed to do that with more than just words. But a pride in treating the prisoners decently tempered their indignation. Escobar shared Goded's very bourgeoisie idea of the rabble, and simply could not grasp the nature of the workers' rage, which didn't go beyond wanting to show the arrogant military men that they largely unarmed workers had defeated them. So after this fierce battle, what they come to is sort of when they were clearing like one of the final fascist holdouts, Durruti, Garcia Oliver, Barro, and Escaso were moving with the militants following a truck that had to get out of the line of fire. There was still some machine gun fire going on, and everyone behind the truck was extremely vulnerable. There was a rebel in a sentry box in the nearby barracks that looked out onto Santa Madrona Street, and he could calmly pick people off one by one with ease. Escaso ran forward, followed by the others, reaching the rear part of the wooden bookseller's stalls. He wanted to get as close as possible as he could to the sentry box. He took off again so quickly that none of his friends could stop him. From afar, they queried him about what he was doing, and he made a gesture with his hand to indicate that he was going to kill the gunman in the sentry box. He surveyed the situation, calculated that he could take the position from behind the truck, and then he started running towards it. A marksman in the sentry box was watching him and fired several times but missed. Escaso stopped for an instant and shot back at the soldier, who was now quite close. He finally made it to the truck, but as soon as he did, a bullet ripped through his forehead. The revolutionary's life, a very full 35 years of age, came to an end in that moment. The marksman would never know that his tiny piece of lead had deprived the Spanish Revolution of one of its most well-balanced and tenacious leaders. No one checked the time, but it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon, July 20th, 1936. So Durruti's best friend has just been killed. Now, what I wonder, because I know you have, I don't know how much you've studied with the revolutions in Russia and China, but were there moments like this where there were revolutionary leaders who had been really distinguishing themselves and then were taken essentially from us by, capricious fate? And things may have gone very differently had that not happened.
Well, I mean, the Chinese Revolution it was 25 years of armed conflict, right? I mean, 25-year civil war. Some of that time they were fighting Japan in alliance with the Nationalist KMT. Other parts of that, the rest of the time they were fighting against the Nationalist KMT. But prior to that, they'd been engaging in alongside the KMT in a war with the warlords and it was a long process, and a lot of, there was briefly declared in the 1930s, there was the Chinese Soviet Republic that was like this whole chunk of China declared itself the Chinese Soviet Republic for 3 or 4 years.
Oh, wow. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. And it was recognized by the Soviet Union, Chinese Soviet Republic, and all of that. And it was eventually defeated by Chiang Kai-shek in alliance with the Nazis. They brought in a Nazi general named Hans von Seeckt to put it down. So and then so I mean there yes many instances like this undoubtedly occurred. No question about it. And that I mean these I think Mao said revolution is not a dinner party.
Yeah, revolution's not a tea party. I think that was what he said. Yeah, and so Durruti, standing nearby, knit his brow as he fought back his tears. Ascaso meant a lot to all of them, particularly to Durruti. With a tired gesture, Garcia Oliver said, "Let's go. This is over. We've won. A new world begins today." They ascended the Ramblas towards the Transportation Workers Union. When they reached the Plaza Acco del Teatro, one of those manning the barricade planted himself resolutely before Durruti and told him, "We're not going to leave this barricade." Durruti gazed at the familiar face, at the man's determined stare and the rifle in his callous hands. "It's not the barricade, but the rifle you have to hold on to. We have to preserve our weapons if the revolution is going to succeed. With them, we can go further, much further. We haven't won yet. The revolution is still in progress, and it will be at risk as long as there are rebels anywhere in Spain."
Well, that reminds me of a quote from Stalin, apparently during the Russian Revolution.
Oh, yeah?
He apparently began a speech by saying, comrades, if we are going to win the revolution, we need three things: arms, arms, and more arms.
That is really, really true. I feel like one of the biggest problems with the Spanish Revolution and like not just the revolution, but also with the Spanish Republic was just there weren't enough arms being supplied, and the arms that they got tended to be very old and poorly stored. And this was odd because Spain was actually the richest country in the world at the time. They had a huge reserve of gold, but all of the Western bourgeoisie nations preferred the fascists to the communists, or even to the communists, the anarchists, or even just the liberals in Spain. And so, there was no help coming from America. They couldn't even pay for it. There was no help coming from France. The Soviet Union eventually did send them large shipments of weapons, and of course they sent people in. But I think with the distance from Russia for supplying them, and the fact that it seemed Stalin's commitment was perhaps more to test his weapons, and also he didn't necessarily want to piss off France and the United States and Great Britain by essentially setting up a Soviet satellite state in Spain. So I've heard those justifications for why Stalin did not seem to have as much of a stake in keeping Spain as the fascists did. Have you heard the story on the communist side for why he may not have wanted to do this?
Spain was the only country in the world that aided the Spanish Republic, right? And communists from all over the world went to Spain and volunteered to fight for the Spanish Republic. Could they have done more? I mean, maybe, but I think, if you compare them to the rest of the world,
they still did way more. I will say, by the way, Mexico did aid them as well. Mexico was super friendly and they sent them a ton of weapons.
They had a tradition coming out of the Mexican Revolution. That makes sense. As far as the Spanish Republic, I mean, the argument that I've generally heard is that, you have to remember the Soviet Union, right? They were trying desperately to form an anti-fascist global alliance. The United States wasn't going to have it. The United States, not only did they ban, they didn't, support the Spanish Republic, but they passed the Neutrality Act, which was a law that kind of made it kind of illegal to support the Spanish Republic. I mean, people still did it. There were like fundraisers and stuff, but it was it was an attempt to stop that. One interesting fact is that Dr. Seuss, the children's writer, was a supporter of the Spanish Republic. And his book, Horton Hears a Who, was actually dedicated to the Spanish Republic. And it was supposed to be Spain calling for freedom, basically, was the idea. And that the world was not listening. And that was he was very vocal about, yes, this book I'm writing, it's about the Spanish Republic, and that's what he meant it to be. I tried to raise that with Vosh, but he wasn't hearing it. But whatever. But yeah, I mean, Dr. Seuss and a lot of people were big supporters of the Spanish Republic. I mean, Broadway, Hollywood. There's a movie, This Spanish Earth, that was made.
Yeah. It was Ernest Hemingway made that. It was one of the world's first propaganda films, actually. Yeah, and I've watched it. You can see it. It's free on YouTube.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I mean, it's a well-made film, and you know, I mean, there was just a huge global mobilization to defend the Spanish Republic. And
Well, what's important to understand about Spain is that, you know, if you put yourself back in this time period, you're seeing country after country after country fall to fascism, including the Germans. And at that time, the Germans had like the strongest workers' movement in the world, except for possibly, you know, the USSR. And there was really like a period where like, which way is Germany going to go? Are they going to be communists, or, you know, are they going to be fascists? And unfortunately, the fascists won that struggle. It's one of the bigger tragedies of history, because I think, you know, had things gone the other way, we could have avoided the Holocaust.
You know? Yeah, and you know, it's wild. Jordan Peterson, in one of his lives, he said, you know, Hitler was elected with a huge majority. I mean, no, never. That's not true. Actually.
Yeah, it's not true at all. By the way, Vash repeated that when I talked with him, and I had to be like, no, Hitler was never elected.
Right, yeah, he had a minority, and he was appointed chancellor in like a backroom deal with another party. But you know, I mean, the standard talking point you get is what Trotsky said. Trotsky blamed, you know, the fact that the German Communist Party and the German Social Democratic Party wouldn't align at the ballot box. He blamed that, and that's being repeated a lot now by people that are supporters of Joe Biden. They make that argument, but
I remember hearing that argument actually about Hillary in 2016.
Yeah, the problem with that argument is that it's a little bit of an oversimplification, because the Social Democratic Party and the German Communist Party had been killing each other for about 10 years. And that, you know, I mean, it's one thing when you don't agree with somebody or something, but this is like these parties had been in armed conflict with each other for about a decade. The Social Democratic Party, you know, there was a revolution in Germany after World War I, right? The workers took power. The Kaiser was forced to step down. A council of workers and soldiers' deputies was created. And the question was, would they write a new constitution for Germany that was a Soviet constitution or a socialist one, or a capitalist one? And the Social Democratic Party had created a capitalist constitution. And then Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht had taken up arms to fight against that and try to fight for a socialist constitution. And they were crushed, you know, and ruthlessly put down by the Freikorps, among whom Hitler came out of, which was these right-wing anti-communist military officers were then sent to kill, you know, them. And Bavaria briefly had a socialist government. It seceded from the rest of Germany and was the Bavarian Soviet Republic briefly, and then that was put down. And that the Social Democrats had presided over crushing the communist revolution after World War I. So they were hated. And the German Communist Party, the Social Democratic Party of Germany, they ran the labor unions, workers who were still employed and had factory jobs. So because of that, they became more and more conservative, because if you've got a job, you're going to be less likely to take risks and all of that. And it's like they were running the labor unions. They had members of parliament. The Communist Party became the party of desperately starving, poor, unemployed people who don't have as much to lose. And in a lot of cases, were having to go out and riot and break store windows and stuff just to eat. And they had the bread riots. So the Communist Party of desperately poor people with nothing to lose. The Social Democrats were the party of labor union bureaucrats, basically, and workers that didn't want to take any risks, and they had a job, and there's a lot of unemployment right now, so they're just gonna so they kind of parted ways, right? And they were at odds. And then in 1929, on May Day, the communists staged a revolt that I think was a huge mistake. They announced on May 1st that they were going to have an armed parade with guns, which was illegal under the Weimar Republic. They did it anyway. They announced to the world, we're going to do this. We don't know who shot first. Could have been a communist, could have been, you know, a police officer. But then, you know, for the next couple of weeks in Wedding in Berlin, there was a huge uprising, and like almost 1,000 people died, I think. It was just really ugly. And it didn't really gain anything. There was no illusion that the communists were going to actually take power. It was almost kind of like wanting to flex their muscles, like, okay, we're going to have an armed parade, and we know you're going to open fire on us when we do, because that's totally illegal. And then we're just going to, you know, cast a big section of the German capital of Berlin into chaos for a couple of weeks to show off that we have a big militia of our own. And they had their own militia. It was very big. It was like an army, basically, a communist army. You know, the Red Front Fighters League, it was called. And so it was just kind of the communists, to flex their muscles, got a lot of their members killed. And because of that, you know, a lot of the German poor people who had been sympathetic to the communists felt like, okay, we're being used here. We're being put into dangerous situations. It's one thing to send us out to fight if we're going to win, but to just flex your muscles like this isn't good. That was one feeling. And then the other thing was that revolt, because so many people died, the British and the Americans and some American companies, not the American government, but Henry Ford and others, really started backing Hitler then, because the fact that the Soviet-aligned Communist Party could unleash that much chaos in Berlin, in the streets of Germany, kind of put the ruling class of the rest of the world on notice that there was a real danger Germany could go communist. So Hjalmar Schacht, who was the banker, who was a big supporter of Hitler, went around to all the other German capitalists and said, "We got to back Hitler. This is just the beginning. If the Reds can do this, next year they can do something even bigger." And a lot of the German capitalists who'd been reluctant, started to support Hitler after that. And that was 1929. Hitler took power in 1933. So, it's a long trajectory. And I just, is it true that, yes, if the German Social Democrats and German communists had been able to get along, that they could have blocked Hitler in an election? Yes, but the problem with that is that it's like, that sounds simple to us now. But in the historical context of all these events I'm describing, where people are dying and there's that would not have happened. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like it was like they were parties that represented different constituencies of the population, and it just wasn't going to happen. And I mean, it's a tragedy ultimately. But a big factor, I think, in the rise of Hitler was the fact that Germany had a huge middle class, right? That the factory workers tended to be social democrats, the starving unemployed tended to be communists. There were a whole lot of shopkeepers, a whole lot of small farmers, and those folks leaned toward fascism overwhelmingly, right? And that there was a huge layer of German society that just, sympathized with fascism and was not part of the labor movement. And fascism in a lot of ways was a reflection of middle class values, fearing big capital with the anti-Semitism and all that, but also fearing the workers as these dangerous mobs. Mm-hmm. It's the middle class trying to preserve itself. Was the basis for a lot of the sentiments that went behind building the fascist movement. Ultimately, though, when fascists came to power, they were serving the capital. That's what they were doing. But it was a middle-class mobilization. And another weird thing is that the Nazi Party was more pro-LGBT than the communists were until the Nazis came to power. And then they started killing all the gay people and putting them in concentration camps. But early on, the Communist Party was known they officially wanted to legalize homosexuality, but it was kind of like they thought it was bourgeois decadence, etc. The Nazi Party was really pro-gay.
Mm-hmm.
It's really bizarre. The head of the Nazi SS fighter group was Ernst Röhm.
I remembered reading about this guy.
Yeah, he was well known to be gay. And the Nazis, for some reason, they really were into, gays are Nazis. They talked about ancient Greek pederasty and stuff like that. And that was like the great civilization. It was very weird. And then the Nazis took power and had a huge anti-gay, exterminated gay people. That was very weird. It was very, very strange. And that Germany
it makes you think kind of like Milo Yiannopoulos, for instance, because
Germany was probably the only country in the world that really had a gay rights movement at that time. I mean, Berlin was known as kind of the gay capital of the world. I mean, you had gay bars, you had drag shows. It was like no other part of the world had that. And there had been this huge think tank basically set up, this huge building that was for the study of sexuality or whatever. And the Nazis burned it and destroyed everything there.
Those are the famous pictures of the book burnings. It was them, and it was also a place in Norway, I think, that researched trans people. Like those are like the two major book burnings, and they destroyed a ridiculous amount of science.
Yeah, and that Sigmund Freud had been very, very popular. He'd been in Austria, but his influence was very, very big, and that there was a member of the German Communist Party he was briefly a member of the German Communist Party, been kicked out, Wilhelm Reich, and he had an organization called Sexpol, and they would just go door to door in Germany selling condoms and pamphlets about birth control.
Oh, good for them.
They were pro-LGBT and all of that. And, this guy was a Communist Party member, and he had his own sexual freedom, activist group that he set up. And again, no other country in the world had that level of.
Yeah. Can you imagine being like an LGBT activist, like in like the 1930s? Like, geez.
In the United States, that was unheard of. In Britain, that was unheard of.
Respect.
Places like Germany really, and that was the thing, is that Germany had come into existence as a country very late. It was like late game. And because of that, you had a lot more vibrant social movements and such, because Germany had the bourgeoisie of Germany had been very weak, right? And they had come together kind of last minute. Britain, France, all of them had been imperial powers all over the world and had their revolutions. Germany doesn't really come into existence until like the 1850s. You finally get, a German society. And so it was much more vibrant and much more diverse and a lot more social tolerance and such. Marxism was the biggest Marxist movement in the world. It's a strange situation. And I talk about, there's actually, it may seem unrelated, but in my new book on Kamala Harris, I actually talk about how, Germany has really, been, it's unfair because Nazism was not what the German people wanted in their majority.
No, I mean, certainly not.
And prior to Nazism was a response to the fact that Germany was so progressive, right? It was a way to crush the progressivism of Germany, right? Mm-hmm. And it was largely backed by British interests, some American corporations. It was, foreign entities worked very, very hard to make sure Hitler came to power in Germany. And that there's this trope where we blame it on Germans. We say, "Oh, Germans, they're strict," and that's a distortion. It was because Germans were so progressive and left that fascism was needed in order to hold them back. And they've really been kind of dealt an unfair card by history, I think, in a lot of ways.
I would agree with you on that from what I've read about the period. And I think you're right in the sense, and it makes sense that capitalists would wash their hands of it and try to blame it on German culture as opposed to, the machinations of the wealthy. Now, we're close to the end here, and I think I may have to bring you back for a third stream if you'd be up for it, because we haven't gotten to Madrid or his death or anything.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, great. But I wanted to close on a positive note here, because they did just do the impossible. The workers, for one of the first times, if not the first time in human history, an army of farmers and factory workers armed with antique weapons and homemade bombs just went and defeated a modern mechanized army, like a modern trained mechanized army, and decisively won. General Goded was executed shortly after this. What's incredible here is that the revolutionary wave had totally unraveled the fabric of civil life. The July 20th issue, this is something about I jumped too far. That was about a specific newspaper, so that's not anything we need to go into here. The spirit of solidarity and fraternity was pervasive throughout the city. Men and women, freed from prejudice that the bourgeoisie ideology had installed in them over centuries, broke with the old world and marched towards a future that all imagined as a realization of their most cherished desires. A new life began in radical and rich Catalonia, where the immense industrial sites were held by the workers and where the fertile fields had been seized from the feudalists and the priests. The entire city of Barcelona soon became a theater of revolution unleashed. Women and men attacked the covenants and burned everything inside, including the money. The old concepts of masters and slaves burned with the religious icons in the bonfires ignited by the people. July 20th was like an enormous party, liberating energies and passions throughout the city. Life took on a new momentum, and it both destroyed and created as the people worked to resolve the practical necessities born from a collective life that lived and wanted to continue living in the street. The street had become everyone's home, a world of barricades, workers' patrols, and permanent vigilance against snipers on the balconies, rooftops, wherever they might lurk. The street and the people in arms were the living force of the revolution, its vanguard. The defense committees now formed into revolutionaries committees backed up by this force. They organized what was called the Federation of Barricades. Militants standing resolutely behind these barricades represented them in the revolutionary committees. Their most immediate task was to secure the revolution's success and protect it against reactionary attacks. But there was more. While the revolution had triumphed in Barcelona, important battles were occurring outside of the Catalan capital. They had to extend their victory over the soldiers to the country as a whole.
Wow. Well, that's certainly a positive note to end on, right? I mean, the city is in uproar. The fascists have been defeated. and some emancipatory politics are spreading.
Yeah, it's really incredible, and this it creates the situation that George Orwell sees at the beginning of Homage to Catalonia. And I may read the next time, just to get us back into this, I may read his assessment of revolutionary Barcelona, because it sounds absolutely incredible. What's also funny here is that I forget exactly if it was Orwell that said this or Adam Hochschild, but a lot of people that had not actually participated in the fighting went and immediately like volunteered to guard the barricades and stuff. I think everybody wanted to be like, yeah, I'm doing it too, guys. Yeah, which is fun. It's a very human thing to do.
I started Occupy Wall Street personally. You know that, right?
Oh yeah. We all did. I remember when Occupy started. Oh geez, I can't believe that was almost a decade ago.
Yeah.
Now, I've got a question for you, Caleb, because we were just reading about a country getting swallowed by civil war, and, you know, it breaking out into like major like urban battles. And one of the things that I'm particularly worried about at the moment, you can tell me if you think this is a little me just being dramatic and a little over worried, but it seems to me that Trump may be preparing for something like a coup. I don't think the military will support him, but he has stated that he refused with a reporter to say that he would aid a peaceful transition of power if he was defeated. And he said that he would not be defeated if they eliminated the ballots. With the Supreme Court where it is, it would seem to me, and the attacks that he's made on the Postal Service, it would seem to me that his plan is to wait until Election Day. Most of the Republicans will go out and vote. The Democrats will send in their ballots for the most part, because his base believes that COVID is a hoax. The election will initially seem to favor him. And what will happen is rather than appealing to the military, I think what he's going to try to do is say, well, I won. That's it. Stop counting the mail-in votes. They can't be verified, and these people are cheating, and it'll go up to the Supreme Court. And with the solid majority he's got at the moment, it seems like that might be it.
But does have a solid majority. The Republicans have a solid majority in the Supreme Court.
That is true,
right? And that you'll notice, McCain's wife endorsed Donald Trump, and that George W. Bush endorsed Donald Trump. I'm sorry, McCain's wife endorsed Joe Biden. W. Bush endorsed Joe Biden.
That's a lot better. I was really worried there for a second.
But there's a lot of people in the Republican Party who don't like Trump, and don't like the way things are heading there. So I don't think you can necessarily guarantee that all Supreme Court justices would line up behind him. Especially
when it would be so brazen and obvious. But I mean, there's been a lot of brazen and obvious things he's done, and the Republicans at every opportunity have disappointed me.
Right. The other thing is that I have a feeling that, all these think tanks are running scenarios right now, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there's the Transition Integrity Project, which I reported on. There's a whole and I have a feeling that neither side really wants it to get that ugly. You know what I'm saying? And I have a feeling that there are some deals being made now. It would be one thing if this was a week before the election and suddenly it was like this, Right. I feel like now, because really nobody wants that level of unrest, I feel like, there are some meetings going on in the back room with, okay, Trump, if you leave peacefully, we'll give you this. Those kind of conversations are going on. And the other thing is that I wouldn't rule out just a solid win for Trump. I mean, that may not be what folks want to hear, but my family in Ohio says Trump has got this. They said they see Trump signs everywhere. They do not see Joe Biden signs.
Yeah. And, Ohio, for the record, though, Ohio tends to be very Trumpian. Like when I was there getting married in 2016, it was Trump signs all over.
Yeah, I mean, and that was Michael Moore's thing about the Brexit states, and that, right now there's what's going on in Florida with Bloomberg and with, felons voting, and Bloomberg now is going to make sure that felons are able to vote by paying off their court fees, and Florida is up in the air. So, but at the moment, it will come down to those states that Trump was able to win before. and he may just have enough support in those states that it could just be that Trump wins.
I mean, it would blow my mind, though, because I mean, I've never seen, like, usually the president reaps the consequences of a failing economy, and we've got the worst economy since the Great Depression. We've got a global pandemic on our hands. Do you really think that? I mean, obviously, his diehard supporters just deny reality, but do you really think that many people are ready to forgive him for this?
I mean, it's not a matter of forgiving them. I think that they just don't believe he's going to do it, and that Americans tend to vote for somebody, not against somebody.
That is a good point.
Obama, the 2 elections were about Obama. Are you for him or against him? You're for him. All right. The 2016 election was about Trump. Are you for him or against him? Trump won. Well, the 2004 election, the first election that I really like, I was a teenager. I campaigned a little bit for Kerry during that election, but it was about Bush. Are you for Bush or against him? Bush won. And that if this election, which is very much, I mean, people aren't voting for Biden, they're voting against Trump. That the way things have gone, that tends to work in Trump's favor. But at this point, so many prominent Republicans have come out against Trump that would make me feel like maybe this could be a situation where that rule doesn't apply. And I really don't know. And I mean, I look at the polls, but then again, I see national polls, right? And nationally, I mean, he never won the popular vote,
Yeah.
So
he got third place behind Hillary, and the overwhelming winner of the 2016 elections, no one.
So, yeah, I mean, I really don't know, and I am looking ahead and not excited about November 4th because if we don't, I feel like if it's not settled on November 4th, we are going to have a big mess on our hands as a country for the next at least 4 months.
Absolutely. No, I know just what you mean. And also what worries me about this whole thing is like with regard to the what we just had happen in Louisville, which is, oh my God, just incredibly frustrating for all of the reasons. Like I keep like starting to blog on that, and then I'm just like, I can't, because it's just so like they killed a woman in her home, like an innocent woman, and they got off.
and even with everything going on, all the awareness, I mean, I will say one thing that probably is working against Trump, and it's like you want to expect people to be as smart as you are, but you never can, right? Because never underestimate people's stupidity.
Yeah,
but he's using a Richard Nixon strategy, right? He's convinced that all the protests in urban areas are going to help him because average Americans don't like that, but he does realize that Nixon won with that in the 70s when the country was way whiter, number one. And the country was also, there was a booming economy for most Americans. And he's running on this silent majority. Aren't you tired of all them crazy leftists protesting out in the streets? Don't you want good Americans? This is a different country. This is not 1970. This is not 1968.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I'm not sure he can bag this one. And when you listen to William Barr and his speeches about how, I now live in an anarchist jurisdiction. I mean,
New York.
Richard Nixon thing, but they're like, oh, the Richard Nixon thing isn't working. Let's do it louder. You know what I mean? Our opponents are communists, right? I mean, it's just like,
someone needs to gift that. Just communists.
Right. I mean, it's like we called our opponents communists one time. Well, they're we're going to scream it. I mean, they're doing the Nixon thing as loud as they possibly can, the silent majority thing, and I'm not sure that that's going to work. I mean, I would agree
with you, and I think that one of the reasons why we've seen the street protests get as extreme as they have, with stuff like the Chaz, and apparently there is also an autonomous zone in Minneapolis that I didn't even know about. And I should be one of the first people to know about this. I'm under the impression that both sides currently want the protests to continue and they want them to escalate. And that may be why the police officers got off. They wanted to stir people up. You saw Bannon, he specifically announced the Muslim ban on a Friday so that quote, the libs could show up and freak out. Trump has gone on record numerous times saying that he is in favor of chaos and he likes to see it and he likes to see all this stuff go crazy around him because he thinks he can benefit from it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you've got the Democrats who are very process obsessed and, kind of button down apple polishers, which drives me crazy. But they seem to think that what they're betting on is that all of this unrest and crashing economy makes Trump look bad, as opposed to driving people into the arms of a strong man. So it seems like both sides want this to happen. And I think regardless of where it comes out, you're going to see a major crackdown as soon as whatever happens is resolved. That's my thinking on this.
The other thing is I feel like that there are layers, like, we have local cops and we have the federal policing agencies and intelligence agencies. And I think a lot of what's going on here is that local cops tend to be much more racist. Local cops tend to be much more conservative and pro-Trump. And that, there's a lot of corruption in local police departments. Let's be real about that as well. And
small towns are incredibly corrupt.
Right. And right now in New York City, there's a big fight between the elected government and the NYPD. The NYPD is pro-Trump and the elected government is not, Yeah. And it's pretty clear that there are divisions here and that the FBI and Trump don't get along too well, after he fired James Comey. And that I feel like there are some that feel like there are some in the federal government that feel like with a crisis this big as the pandemic, we need to have policing from the top down. We can't have every local county sheriff doing whatever he wants. And I think that there may be a desire for policing to be much more from above, centralized. And then, however, that would take away the autonomy of a lot of local cops and all of that. And there's a fear of that. And there's a lot of stuff going on. I mean, stuff is getting weird with the Trump's ban on racist trainings, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's bizarre. Right. Another thing I was thinking the other day is, Trump has done this rant against Howard Zinn. Right. And all of that, and it's like part of me thought, like, what is he going for? But then I realized, it's like, OK, so it's like, New York City rich people, their kids are going to college and high school and they're reading Howard Zinn in their school or whatever. But, the Pentagon, right? Those Pentagon generals are making six-figure salaries, big six-figure salaries. Their kids are not going to schools and reading Howard Zinn. I can guarantee you that. There's no way that, like, Mad Dog Mattis's kids are going to a school and reading Howard Zinn. You know what I'm saying? So among the elites, among the powerful people, there are different factions that just want different things and view the world a little bit differently. And we want to pretend sometimes that, the Republicans have worked very, very hard to craft this image of like all rich people are these liberal elites who drink lattes or whatever, but there is a very conservative layer of wealthy people that are behind Trump. And that doesn't get acknowledged. Betsy DeVos, for example, and that there are conservative people and there are also, people in the FBI, people in the Pentagon who are conservative and right wing and feel like they're under attack maybe from other elites that have a more socially liberal worldview or something. There are some big fights going on behind the scenes. But I feel like at this point, right, that both sides think they're going to benefit from the protests. That's pretty clear. The Democrats think they're going to stir up everyone against Trump. The Trump people feel like they're going to, get everyone to react against these awful protests. But I feel like nobody wants the elections to be contested, right? At the end of the day,
I think people want a good, solid win one way or the other. If Trump wins an overwhelming victory, I may just go into the woods and never come out. But, I'd be very surprised and incredibly disappointed in my countrymen. But at least, there will be some decision here. I can't imagine Trump winning because he couldn't win the popular vote in 2016 when things were good. And if he couldn't win the popular vote in 2016 when things are good, with things, literally burning down and, his administration constantly showing itself to be a complete and utter clown show. But, again, also people just don't get all that information. How many people know, when I debated Joe Biden versus Donald Trump with a Republican a couple of weeks ago, and he had no idea that there was a lawsuit against Donald Trump from one of Jeffrey Epstein's victims that said that Trump had raped her in Jeffrey Epstein's apartment. And he was going on and on about how Trump was, he was like doing like QAnon stuff and like going on and on about how Trump was going to bring down this pedophile ring. And like, I know projection is a key facet of fascist thinking, but it's so annoying to see them accusing everybody of the things that their people are actually doing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't take sides as a journalist, right? I don't campaign for anybody. I'm not in any political party. But on top of that, I'm just being blatantly honest with you when I tell you I'm not really sure who's better at this point. You know what I mean? Trump disgusts me. Joe Biden. I have real fears about Joe Biden. He talks nicer. I will say he's a lot more pleasant to listen to. Okay. But, I mean, I read, what he's for, and that part of what he's promising to do if he's elected is, start, a social media crackdown, basically. That's bad. We all know that Donald Trump couldn't have happened without Bernie Sanders, right? If the Democrats had not maneuvered against Bernie Sanders so badly in 2016.
Yeah.
And there's a feeling among DNC leadership and all of that, Trump, he's a dangerous populist demagogue of the right. Bernie Sanders is a dangerous populist demagogue of the left. And we need to get in to office. We need to team up with Silicon Valley. We need to convene an international meeting and team up with the UN and make sure that nobody like Trump or Sanders ever can happen again. And that we just have boring neocons and neolibs for the rest of your life. And that, I'm telling you, they are determined to nail the door shut, and that in
you think they'll actually manage to do that with the coalition that Bernie built, and especially with Biden as old as he is, and clearly not all there.
Yeah,
I mean, Trump isn't all there. But
you're voting for Kamala Harris. I mean, that's who you're voting for. I mean, and that's also another point of fear. And people should read my book
on Kamala Harris. Read Caleb's book on Kamala Harris.
Right, but at the end of the day, I mean, Trump disgusts me. I have big fears about Joe Biden. So, I'm not campaigning for anybody. I'm sitting here and I'm hoping, I will say, as much as I try to be clearly objective, I love my country. You know what I'm saying? I'm not a national chauvinist. I don't go around saying the United States is better than every other country. But no, I mean, I'm a citizen of the United States, and I love the community I live in. I love the state I grew up in. I love the people that I live around now, and I don't want them to get hurt. And that a contested election where there's dual inaugurations and people shooting at each other, it's not good for anybody. I don't want people hurt like that. You know what I'm saying?
I would agree. I think the best thing that we could stand to do as a country is calm down over the next, if you like, I'm someone who I advocate for the eventual abolition of the state, for people to organize themselves organically on the community and regional level. But the revolutionary chaos, like what we were reading about here, that's not something that anybody wants. No. It's not something anybody in Spain really wanted. And it's not something, anybody who knows what they're talking about really wants. I remember the prospect of political violence came up on Insurrection at one point, and George Martinez, who was sort of my unofficial co-host for that show, the former ambassador of hip hop, his reaction to even the suggestion of it was just like, that level of breakdown when violence hits the street, nobody wins. And I've always remembered that, because he came out of some rougher communities than you or I have probably known. I will also point out, by the way, with regard to the countries and the cities, I've been doing some research for a Black Lives Matter debate I'm doing next week. And one of the things that I was fascinated to learn is that only 30% of police shootings happen in urban areas. The rest of them happen like and the majority of police shootings that kill people happen in like small towns and rural communities. And it makes sense because the police there are not as well trained. There's nobody looking over their shoulders, and they can kind of do what they like. In my old Kentucky town, I used to say, if you have the right last name in this town, you can murder with impunity. And so, like, a lot of people have this very romanticized view of the country, but I'll tell you, the country ain't it ain't what it's cracked up to be if you actually go there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all afraid and nervous about all this. But the thing that's on my mind is whatever happens this fall. You know, Nietzsche, who, you know, not a good guy, but one thing he said that I think is true is he said, "Out of chaos cometh order."
Mm-hmm.
And that, okay, so maybe Donald Trump won't be able to be the dictator that he maybe aspires to be, or the strong man, or the whatever he wants to be. But somebody else will come along. And that, like, we talked about the Weimar Republic, right? For about a decade, Germany was very unstable. Then you got fascism. You know what I'm saying? You know?
Yeah.
Following the Russian Revolution, you know, the early years of the Bolshevik Revolution were very unstable. Out of that, you got Stalin. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, that societies generally, you give it about a decade, they'll stay unstable, and then somebody comes along, and there are a lot of people that are like, I don't care who it is, just stabilize the shit, and that scares me also, because you know, I mean, you know, if there's not some kind of progressive force that is offering stability, we know that stability is going to come from, whether it comes in the form of Trump or not, it'll come from the right.
That's a very good point, but also, and I will say, like, on that end, and Nietzsche, by the way, better guy than most realize. His works were actually taken by his sister and selectively edited and changed to put them more in line with Nazi ideology, because his sister was a Nazi. So, like, yeah, Nietzsche was a jerk, but he wasn't like a monster.
Well, he talk about the Paris Commune. That was pretty. He hated the Paris Commune. He thought it was the worst thing that had ever happened. You know, and you know, I mean, his philosophy is very individualist. I will say that when I was a teenager, I read "Thus Spake Zarathustra," and I wanted to just, you know, it's like an alienated intellectual who feels like the society doesn't understand them. That book, you know, pumps you up, and that Ayn Rand stuff is like such a weak imitation of that. You know, like,
indeed.
Yeah, like Nietzsche, though, I mean, in terms of an individual who feels like they don't fit in and wants to challenge authority and all of that, that's the real deal, right? He was the real deal. Ayn Rand, you know, kind of watered down and distorted that kind of stuff to, you know, serve capitalism or whatever. And, you know, it doesn't have anywhere near the beauty that Nietzsche has when he puts forward that same kind of alien. You know.
I mean, Nietzsche was genuinely a genius. Like, even what I've read of him, I even quoted him in North to Maine, which, did you ever see that when it played in New York?
No, I never did.
I think you would have really liked it. Maybe if I bring it back to off Broadway, we'll go together and watch it.
I wouldn't miss it, right?
Yeah.
But, all right. Well, it's getting late.
Do you want to plug your pluggables?
What's that?
You want to plug your pluggables?
Plug them, interspersed the program. I've plugged all my pluggables, so go ahead and plug your pluggables.
Sure. Well, I am Brenton Lengel. I am a poet, playwright. I've had 7 plays produced in New York City. I'm officially, now that New York is an anarchist jurisdiction, it's my city, and I am King Anarchist. So, you know, it's all right. I'll go easy on you, Caleb. And also, I wanted to. The second issue of the comic has been sent to the printers. I hope to get it soon if Trump hasn't destroyed the post office, because I'm really waiting on that. And I wanted to show you this, Caleb, because I think you'll get a kick out of it. This is my new T-shirt, if you'll see.
Oh, wow. Yeah, Space Aliens, right?
Space Aliens. Get in, loser. We're doing butt stuff. I couldn't resist. One of the few purchases that I haven't been this happy about a T-shirt in like 2 years.
Flying saucer humor, right?
Yep. Flying saucer humor. All right. Well, thank you guys very much. Caleb, it's always a pleasure. And we will have you back next week to finish up the saga of Buenaventura Durruti.
Tune in for